Hello, friends. How are you doing? I wanted to tell you a little bit about John Maynard Keynes and the money multiplier. And I use a story to do this. I usually do this in class, but I didn't have time, and so here we are. So first of all, here's a picture from a magazine of John Maynard Keynes. You can look him up, but that's kind of what he looked like there. And the um, the idea is that he offered an alternative economic theory. We talked about Adam Smith and free market economics in Unit 1, along with Karl Marx and communism in Unit 2. So, like, two extremes of either the government's in control of everything in communism, or, as the government's in control of as little as possible and stays out of the economy as much as possible with free market economics. So here's the story. We're going to pretend we're going to go back to the 1930s, and we're going to pretend we're in Arizona, and that I, in the 1930s, am the owner of a toaster factory in Mesa, and I have a bunch of workers. But the Great Depression hits, and there's nobody buying toasters anymore because they don't have bread, so they don't need a toaster. So here we are. We're in the 1930s. Toaster factory is in trouble because nobody's buying bread, and nobody's buying toasters. So one day, I decide that I need to close down the factory, and I bring in my worker, Andy. Andy's going to be the worker in the factory. Usually I pick a student in class, but we're not in class, so it's going to be Andy. Andy works in the toaster factory. Andy's been a great employee. He's been loyal, faithful, a hard worker, and he's the last one I fire because he's the hardest one for me to fire because I appreciate him so much. And so I fire Andy and close down the toaster factory, and I tell Andy, hey, as soon as things turn around, you'll be the first one hired back. But Andy's fired. I give him his last paycheck, and he walks out the door. He goes and sits on the street and tries to figure out what he's going to do because there's no jobs, and he just lost his job, and he's pretty bummed out. Now, there's another person in our story, Kara, and Kara has a ham sandwich cart that she pushes around Mesa, and she sells ham sandwiches to people. And Andy loves ham sandwiches. He would buy 2 or 3 a day. Sometimes he'd buy one to take home and have for dinner at night, but he would always buy at least 2. And so every day around 11 o'clock in the morning, she'd swing by the toaster factory because she knew that the workers in the toaster factory would buy ham sandwiches. So she comes around the corner just like usual, and she looks up, and she sees Andy sitting on the curb, and it looks like he might be crying. And she says, this doesn't look good. And then she goes up to him, and she says, what's wrong, Andy? And Andy's like, I just lost my job. And inside, Kara's thinking, well, there goes my business, because he's my best customer. And he says, well, I'll buy a couple, but this is it for me. I don't have a job anymore. I'm not going to be able to buy ham sandwiches anymore. And so Kara, along with her employee, Brittany, head off on their way. Now later that day, Kara's going to fire Brittany because Brittany was her pig tender and knife sharpener and pig cleaner up after her person, and now Brittany's fired too. So things are bad there because both of them got fired. Now Andy would go once a week to get a clean shave and get a haircut at the barber shop where Paul was the barber. Okay, so this is a different person, Paul. And so Andy swings by and says, hey, I lost my job at the toaster factory. I'm not going to be coming here anymore. I love those straight razor shaves you give. And Paul had a broom boy named, what should we name Paul's broom boy? Frankie the broom boy. Frankie would sweep up hair and sharpen the blades. And Frankie could make homemade shaving cream with cactus stuff that he found in the desert. But Frankie later that day is going to get fired too because Paul realizes that he's about to lose a bunch of customers because the toaster factory closed down and things haven't been good anyway. So that's it. So Frankie's fired, Brittany's fired, both businesses are kind of closing down. Things are going bad, okay? And I didn't mention also, Andy has one living relative, Grandpa Joe. Unfortunately, Andy's parents were killed in a tragic accident at the Grand Canyon. It's terrible. But Grandpa Joe is his only living relative. Grandpa Joe is a Spanish-American war veteran that lost his arm when he was charging San Juan Hill with the Rough Riders. He went with Teddy Roosevelt to Cuba, and poor Grandpa Joe was charging the hill, and then his horse tripped and fell, and now Grandpa Joe only has one arm. So Andy's Grandpa Joe's only living relative, and Andy tries to help Grandpa Joe whenever he can. He gives him food, talks to him, hangs out with him, and is really his only source of support in the world. Grandpa Joe doesn't have any friends, really. Andy's his only living relative. And Andy realizes that he's not going to be able to take care of Grandpa Joe anymore because he, lost his job at the factory. And he also has sort of this pride that he doesn't want to let Grandpa Joe down or think that he's a failure because he lost his job. So he lies to him and tells him that someone's here. He lies to him and tells him, or no, he doesn't lie to him. He just leaves a note on his door saying he got a job in Montana cutting down trees or something, working for lumber, I don't know, doing something. And so he basically just abandons Grandpa Joe, and that's going to be that. And so we're kind of in a dark place here because we got Andy losing his job, Kara had to fire Brittany, Paul, the barber, fired his broom boy Frankie and is no longer in business. And Grandpa Joe is going to wake up tomorrow and find out that his son his grandson's left, and now he assumes that he's going to be sending money, but there's not going to be any money being sent. So it's kind of dark. So Andy has no luck over the next few weeks, no job prospects. He moves into a park and sleeps on a park bench. He uses newspapers as a blanket. It's a really rough time. One day, a communist comes up to Andy and says, "You should join the Communist Party. At least with the Communist Party, you get fed, you get work, you get the meals and all that sort of stuff. You get a place to live. Sounds great." And he says, "Hey, Karl Marx said this would happen. That eventually, all the capitalist industries would fail, and the capitalist economy would collapse, and then eventually communism would rise." And Andy kind of would like to have a job and a place to sleep, but he doesn't really like communism because he doesn't think that it would work in the long run. And he's still hopeful that someday he can get a job and get out of this. So he rejects that. Later he talks to a free market capitalist named Oswald. And Oswald says, "Hey, I know things are bad, but someday we'll recover." And Andy says, "I don't think recovery's coming anytime soon. I'd like to get a job and get out of here." So, the point there is he doesn't really like the communist message. He doesn't really like the capitalist message. But good news. One day, Andy is sleeping in the park. The sun comes up. The birds are chirping. And he takes his newspaper blanket up. And he yawns. And he looks at this story. And it's about the government's building the Hoover Dam up in Nevada. And they're hiring hardworking young men. And Andy says, "I'm a hardworking young man. This is the job for me. I'm going to go to Nevada. I'm going to get to work. And I'm going to make some money." So he goes to the train yard. He doesn't have any money, so he has to do the thing where you run and you jump on the train. And the first time he runs, and he jumps, and he falls off, and he hurts his arm. But lucky for him, he just shakes it off. He's not going to be like Grandpa Joe and lose it. The second time, success. He gets on the train, goes up to Nevada, gets a job, and walks into the employment office, says, "Hey, I'm a hardworking young man." And they say, "You're hired." And so things are great for Andy. Now he's going to work. He's going to get a paycheck. Now keep in mind, this is a government job, building the Hoover Dam, government-funded building project. He's getting a check from the government, or indirectly from the government for this project. And this was meant to help find work for people to get out of the Great Depression. So Andy works. He gets his first paycheck. And guess, he's going to send a telegram. They didn't have email or telephones yet, really. So they weren't common. So he's going to send a telegram to Mesa, Arizona, and guess who he wants to talk to? Nope, not him. He doesn't want to talk to Grandpa Joe. He wants to talk to Kara, the lady with the ham sandwich cart, because he loves ham sandwiches. So he says, "Kara, there's a bunch of hardworking young men up here that are hungry. Get the pigs, get the cart, bring them up here." So Kara gets Brittany and says, "Brittany, you want your job back?" And Brittany says, "Sure." And they herd the pigs all the way across the desert to Nevada. Brittany stands guard at night to make sure that the coyotes and whatever wild animals, mountain lions, bobcats, whatever, don't eat the pigs. Well, they only lose a couple, one to a mountain lion, and Yeah, and the other, well, yeah, they get one disappears in the night. So, but the rest of them make it. They get up there, and she sees Andy first day she gets there, and Andy buys 4 ham sandwiches from her, and business has never been better. Things are great, and so that's good. And then Paul, the barber, doesn't have any work, business. He's a barber. He doesn't have anyone to cut hair because nobody can afford a haircut in Mesa, and he hears about the Hoover Dam, and he decides he's going to go up to Nevada to see if he can have some customers up there. So he gets Frankie, his old broom boy. He says, "Get your broom. We're going to Nevada." Barber Paul hops on a donkey. He hands Frankie, broom boy Frankie, the rope, and it says, "Go north by northwest to Nevada." And Frankie leads his employer, Paul, and the donkey across the desert all the way to Nevada. They get there. Things are great. Awesome. Okay. So far, the idea is that this is supposed to illustrate the multiplier effect. Andy got a job from the government, but Andy's not the only one that's benefiting. The money multiplies and ripples through the economy. Notice Kara's getting her business back. Brittany got her job back. Paul gets his business back. Broom boy Frankie gets his job back. Things are getting better, and the money that's being spent on the project isn't just helping Andy. It's helping other people in the economy, private business owners and employees of private businesses. So that's the argument that Keynes makes for the multiplier effect, for Keynesian sort of fiscal policy, is the government is spending money, but it's spending money to sort of get the economic wheels in motion. If we go back to the beginning of the story, there was sort of a negative cycle. A job loss led to a job loss, led to a job loss. Now we're reversing that cycle. Andy gets his job back, Kara gets hers, business back, Brittany gets her job back, Paul gets his business back, broom boy Frankie gets his job back. So that's sort of the whole point, is that we're going to recover, and that money's going to multiply and affect more than just one person. Now, the last thing we have to deal with is Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe, surprisingly, isn't dead in our story, so that's good news. So we didn't kill Grandpa Joe. So Grandpa Joe, Andy didn't realize this, but Grandpa Joe was pretty resourceful. He picked up some trapping skills when he was in in the Spanish-American War, when he spent some time in Cuba with Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt taught him how to set snares and different kinds of traps, and Grandpa Joe's been snaring, local wild animals like squirrels and, small lizards and different things. And he's been able to put together a decent diet. He goes to the church a few times a week where they feed him soup. And so he's making it okay. It's not great, but he's making it okay. Problem being, he hasn't been, responsibly managing his trapping. So his traps don't produce as much as they used to. He's noticed the soup at the church is kind of watery, or at least more watery than it was before. So he's getting by, but it's getting harder, okay? So Andy never talks to Grandpa Joe again for the rest of his life. He just assumes Grandpa Joe died, and plus he likes his newfound independence and the ability to spend all of his money on himself. He's selfish, so he's self-interested. But Grandpa Joe needs help, and guess what happens? The government passes the Social Security Act, and Grandpa Joe gets a Social Security check, and guess what Grandpa Joe's going to do with that Social Security check? He's going to buy some bread. And you know what else he's going to want to buy so that he can have the bread the way he likes it? He's going to buy a toaster from me. And now I'm back in business. So, happy ending. Yay. Alright, so if you made it to the end of the story, it's only 14 minutes long. So I appreciate you watching it if you made it this far. And if not, John Maynard Keynes is the most sort of important economist of the 20th century by far. They teach Keynesian economics in college. You can take classes on Keynesian economics. He's right up there with Adam Smith and Karl Marx as far as significance, just for kind of creating this idea that the government, we don't have to have a world where it's either no government or all government. What Keynes is going to say is the free market's good. People should be able to make choices for themselves. But the government can study the economy and come in and fix an economic problem that it identifies and then step away. That the government's not like evil, or the government isn't all bad, I guess. And and that if you have smart economists like John Maynard Keynes advising the government officials on what to do and what kind of policies to make, then things are good. In class, maybe later ask me about Keynes and the Egyptian pyramids versus the Roman aqueducts, because that's an interesting example. Okay? All right. All right, thanks for watching. Bye. Oh, whoops. Nope.